Hey, Cypher here. I got a 3-part mini-series that I want to start today. It's based on an old TV show called Connections, which is all about making connections. And we'll be connecting the Holy Bible to video games. So Connections was a show that came out in 1978. Most people haven't watched it since then, but it's something that really inspired me as a historian. This guy named James Burke would walk around in his silly little leisure suit and talk about these historical connections that expanded the whole of history and really made us understand how interconnected we really all are. So I kind of wanted to do that. So when I'm saying that I'm connecting video games to the Bible, I'm not talking about how religion affects video games or vice versa. In fact, I don't really care about that whatsoever. What I am talking about is how Holy Scripture actually caused video games. That's right, I mean one caused the other. And through this long, convoluted sequence, you'll see how these two are causally connected and how interconnected everything really is through that chain. So there's a particular passage in the Bible that says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's." You probably heard it a dozen times, right? But it doesn't really seem to have that much of a purpose. Well, by the 12th century AD, it served a great purpose, and the scholars at that point were using it to explain a system that had been around since the 8th century. You see, in the 8th century, Europe was all divided up through a bunch of different monarchies, and everybody was vying for more and more territory. It was a pretty hectic system. But this one guy decided to expand a little bit further than everyone else. His name was Charlemagne. Charles the Great in English. After he had expanded far enough, he was crowned emperor, starting off this huge set of events. And you see, why it was so huge has nothing to do with Charlemagne himself, but with who was crowning him emperor. And that person was the Pope. From then on, emperors were crowned by the Pope, making it so that you had a divine right to rule. That passage about Caesar in the Bible has often been used to explain why rulers have the divine right to rule. So this went on splendidly for hundreds of years. From the 8th century all the way to the 18th century, and actually a little bit into the 19th century. Charlemagne had founded the First Reich, or Empire, known as the Holy Roman Empire. Not holy, not Roman, and by the end, not really an empire. But to be crowned emperor, you had to be crowned by the Pope because the Bible said so. But this whole weird thing happened in Europe in the 17th century called the Age of Enlightenment. People started questioning the divine right to rule. People started questioning the Bible. People started using things like reason. What a thought. Actually questioning things. But this was a pretty radical thing. In England, they had a whole civil war over the divine right to rule. But the emperorship kept on going and going and going. By the late 18th century, there was a lot of pushback on this whole divine right to rule, and then this little event happened called the French Revolution. Well, you want to talk about questioning the divine right to rule? How about peasants just beheading their king? This was a hell of a crisis, right? But eventually they had to get some sort of ruler, so Napoleon took over in a coup d'etat, and then he started trying to take over the rest of Europe, to the point that he could call himself emperor. Now, something that had really helped the whole divine right to rule thing had not really that much to do with the Bible, though it was used as an explanation as to why the church had it. The real reason was this. Money powered the emperorship. Money powered that. If you didn't have a divine right to rule, then why fund the Catholic Church? Well, the Catholic Church had been broken up for a while now, and it's time for a peasant to get control of the emperorship. So Napoleon had himself crowned emperor. But just to challenge the whole divine right to rule thing altogether, right as the crown was about to be put on his head by the Pope himself, he yanked it from the Pope's arms and put it on himself. He might as well have just punched the Pope in the face. A lot of Europeans saw this as the final death knell of the whole divine right to rule thing altogether. But others didn't like that. So this one cardinal went around Europe campaigning for the divine right to rule. His name was Ursuli Consalvi. He went from kingdom to kingdom trying to argue that the only reason why that king was in power was because of the divine right to rule. He was really shoving this down people's throats, but he didn't really get anywhere. And so the Pope decided to send him in a different place, to this small peace conference that was happening in Vienna. They were trying to figure out what they would do with Europe once they had gotten rid of Napoleon. So Consalvi went there to represent the Papal States. As we all know, Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo, and the Viennese Conference was hoisted up to an even higher level, and everyone had to be there. And Consalvi was pushed off to the sidelines, along with the divine right to rule. So you would think that's where this story would end with the Holy Bible, but we have a long way to go, and that's just the end of the first episode. So to recap, we went from Holy Scripture, to the divine right to rule, to the emperorship, to Napoleon usurping the divine right to rule, to Consalvi and the Viennese Conference. And that's where we'll start off next time. So subscribe to see that, and I'll see you then. The Holy Bible